All right, I want to welcome everybody back to the Marathon County Infrastructure Committee meeting. We are on to item 5D, discussion and possible action resulting from closed session discussion. We have no action coming from closed session. Moving on to item 6, we don't have anything for operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy for items A or B. So we are on to item 7, educational presentations and committee discussion. 7A, update on IT projects, including Workday project status. If you could keep it as straight lined as possible, we'd appreciate it.
Good morning. There is an update in your packet. I'll be very brief. The main thing that usually gets a lot of attention is our Workday project. We spent most of the last month working with the audit team to get the 2023 audit work done. One of the challenges we had was some of the grants were not set up correctly. Some that were set up correctly were not processed correctly, so we spent probably 3 weeks cleaning up grants for 2023 so that the audit could finish. There is some leftover work from that to clean up, to get them the 2024 grant payments set up correctly, so we're working on that next. I have a new hire starting on the 22nd that has a lot of Workday experience, so that will be helpful. We held 3 training sessions for the department heads recently, and that went pretty well. And then the next couple of things up on deck is we're moving forward with using ADP to do the W-2s and the tax and the one of the filings that we need to do. And what was that thing I was going to mention? We have a contract with Gravity but the city's going to be working with Gravity to do budget book. It's a piece of software for both making a paper budget book and an electronic one, although the county will actually not be online with that until next year. And then two other things I wanted to quick mention is, if you've been over by the library, you notice that there's a whole bunch of construction on the the south side of the library. We had to move fiber out of the way so that they could do that air handler project. That got delayed because they had problems with soil. And we finally just got the fiber stuff moved last week. And then the next step for that, now that the fiber has been moved out of the way, is we will be moving all the electronics that are in 210 River Drive over to the library computer room. And that'll allow us to eventually in spring abandon 210 River Drive and do whatever the board decides to do with that.
All right.
Thanks.
Any questions? Thank you for the report. Move on to item 7B, 2025 capital technology plans.
Yeah, the big projects we have coming up for next year, the main large project we have next year is our phone system, and there was a CIP request in for that. There's a fair amount of cameras that we still need to replace, but the big project next year is going to be replacing our phone system, which is, I think, 11 years old. It's at end of life and end of support. The hardware side of it is at end of support next year. So that's probably the biggest submission that'll be in there. That's in the packet. Any questions on that?
Hearing no questions, thank you for your report.
Very exciting project.
I'm sure we'll be talking about it in the coming years. 7C, BEAD timeline update.
I submitted a timeline update for you all it's in your packet, just to give you a sense of where we're at with the BEAD process. We're, as John mentioned earlier in the meeting, we're kind of on hold until the volume 2 of the PSC BEAD packet gets approved, and we're waiting on that. I've heard that the PSD say they're hoping by fall or end of year to have it approved. Once they approve that, that's when we have a 1-year timeline for the PSC to allocate the money. So the dates start rolling. I put these dates in as estimates just to give you a timeline, a sense of what it might be, but it looks like the process may go into late summer, early fall of 2025, likely. The other thing that's in the packet, I wanted to clarify something. I submitted an ongoing broadband grants report, and I color coded it, but I think it's kind of misleading, so I want to change it. But it's in your packet. Frontier is in red because it was pulled and they revoked the grant, and the revocation was accepted by the PSC. The next item, Charter, the RDOF grant, it's not all canceled. That's what if you look at it and think, oh, all of RDOF is canceled from charter, that's not accurate. It's just that they issued a notice to default on about 25 different census blocks, which is about 156 addresses. So that's what I need to fix. Pardon me? Yeah, in the eastern part of the county, yep. And then Bug Tussle the funding is currently under consideration by the county board, so that's why that's in yellow. And then green are the ones that are ongoing. So if you have any questions, otherwise I am done.
Thank you for the report. Appreciate the timeline and just what you had in the packet there. That was very useful. So any questions? Hearing none, thank you for the report. We're on to item 7D, Marathon County Assembly's Ordinance 12.04, review of draft update. Welcome our folks from CPZ.
Morning, everyone. I'll try to keep it as brief as I can here. So, I'm Garrett Pago. I'm the land use specialist. I work out of conservation planning and zoning. This is Shad Harvey. He's our land use resource manager and zoning administrator. So, we're just going to provide you guys with an educational update here this morning. Like I said, I'll try to be as brief as possible. So, 12.04 is the large assemblies ordinance that is currently on the books in Marathon County. Under direction from county board, we took a look at the 12.04 ordinance due to a couple things. Because of some case law that happened back in the early 2020s, it was found that portions of the large assemblies ordinance were unenforceable and possibly unconstitutional. So county board directed the Administrator Leonard, through his work plan, for that to be looked at and to be updated to brought back into compliance. So because of that, a work group was formed in June of 2023. Supervisor Robinson, who I see has now left us, was part of that work group. And the beginning of the work group, the whole idea was to discuss whether or not Marathon County wanted to continue to regulate in this area. Like I said, the large assemblies ordinance has been here, I want to say, since the 80s. And it had not been basically touched since at least then. So that was the first thing that the work group wanted to do. And the other part was, if they decided they wanted to move forward and regulate in that area, was to analyze the current ordinance and create an ordinance that is enforceable and constitutional. So we engaged multiple facets of county government and citizens throughout to create the work group. Starting with the STEAM show and the Taste and Glow representatives, they were part of the planning and working through of the new ordinance. Environmental Resources Committee member, Public Safety Committee, some members from infrastructure, and then Marathon County staff, CPZ, Emergency Management, Health, Parks and Rec, Highway, and the Sheriff's Office were all involved in going through the current ordinance and then working on the updates. So this is just an overview of the timeline that we had for the ordinance and where we're at this point. Like I said, in June 2023, we started and the work group was organized to analyze the ordinance. From June through late September, early October, we worked with the work group to develop an ordinance draft to bring forth to the committees. And then in September, early October of 2023, we distributed that draft to the towns and the standing committees. That was infrastructure, public safety, and then the Environmental Resources Committee. In October 2023, in the late part, we did presentations to both the Eastern and Western Towns Associations meetings. And then in November through January, we worked on some draft ordinances. We brought them back to committees. I'm sure if anyone was on infrastructure at that time, you've seen the draft ordinance come before you a couple of times now. It's also in your packet. And then we brought it forth to county board. Then it was brought back and sent back to the work group for some additional comments to be worked through. And then in March 2024, we did meet with the work group again. It was brought forth back to Environmental Resources Committee earlier this month, or late last month. And then it was directed to go back to the work group for some final touch-ups. Some of the input that we received from town members, county board supervisors, and then some of the general public that were involved in the update was the purpose of the ordinance, what it was actually for, and what portion we were regulating. The threshold when that ordinance does come into effect, what actually defines a large assembly. security concerns, how we're going to implement the ordinance, and then any appeals process, and then fees. So the purpose of the draft ordinance is to regulate large numbers of individuals that are going to be on a property that exceed what the property is normally used for, in order to help with things that require certain services like health, sanitary, fire, police, transportation, utility agencies. And then it's also to help provide some clarity in permitting and setting things up. So in order to protect the general public for people that are involved in the event and those who are surrounding it that aren't necessarily part of or taking part of that event. So one of the big things is where the work group worked on was where this is going to apply. Who is it going to affect? And it's going to would be in effect for all unincorporated areas in Marathon County. So their zoning status would not apply to that. So all the unincorporated areas, it leads out all the villages and all the cities, they are able to regulate in this area on their own. And the purpose for that would be to protect people and the resources of Marathon County. So working with the work group, the threshold that was proposed in the new draft ordinance is 3,000 or more attendees at any one time, or an aggregate over an 8 consecutive hours. There are some exceptions in the ordinance to where certain areas and certain parcels or properties or activities would not apply or have to be regulated under this ordinance. Some of those are places of worship, stadiums, athletic fields, arenas, auditoriums, and coliseums. The other one is areas that are regulated by local zoning or have some other state or federal designation that allows them to operate on the property as is. So, for example, if you have a zone town and a property and is zoned for them to hold large events or have a commercial use where a large gathering is permitted, those areas would be exempt from this ordinance, so they would not have to get a permit under 12.04. The other, one of the other exceptions that the work group came up with was that fees shall not apply to government-sponsored events held on government-owned property where those proceeds are returned to the government or the community, nor to assemblies required to be licensed under other laws, regulations, or resolutions, ordinances by Marathon County. Note, it does not exempt a property owner or an organizer from getting proper permits for any local authorities, such as any other zoning authority that would take place on that property. Another one that was brought up, and we worked very closely with the Sheriff's Department on, was security, providing some sort of security for these events. The draft ordinance has a requirement for, I believe it's 3 security personnel per 1,000 attendees. It does not have to be law enforcement. It does state that these people do need to register with the Department of Safety and Professional Services and go through a background check. And the big thing with the security concerns that has been brought up is that there's events that have been taking place in the county that relatively don't have any issues. They don't have a large police presence. There haven't been calls made. And the one thing that we wanted to make sure that was that is out there and known is that the draft ordinance it's a planning document. It's for the events that we know take place in the county, and then the events that we hope come to the county, so that they can operate in a safe manner and be beneficial for everybody who attends. So when it comes to implementation, if the ordinance is adopted, we've developed some FAQs, resource guides, things that we can distribute to applicants so that they can kind of work through the process, and other things that they should consider when they're planning their event. All of the applications will be funneled through conservation planning and zoning, and then we'll distribute them to all of the necessary departments, such as highway and emergency management, the sheriff's office. The health department would also get the permits from us, but they'll have their own separate permits that they'd have to get, things like temporary camping, their food permitting, and things like those. So those would still come through our office, but we would coordinate with health department in order to kind of create a more centralized area so that applicants don't have to go to all these different departments and see what they need from each of them. It just makes it a little bit easier for them to organize it, bring it to one place, and then distributing for review after that. In the work group and then from other committee input, we did find a suggestion that the ordinance should be evaluated. The work group came up with a suggestion that the ordinance be reevaluated for effectiveness after 5 events. The concern was a lot of times ordinances are looked at after a certain number of years to determine whether they're still being effective or any adjustments need to be made. The concern is that you may not get many events that reach this threshold. You may only get 1 or 2 a year. You may get 1 or 2 across the 5-year period. So it would not give a large enough sample size potentially for us to really take a good hard look and analyze the ordinance itself. So as far as issuance, applicant must submit a application within 40 business days prior to the event. That was one of the concerns through some case law that came out, that potentially the review process or the minimum number of days for review might have been too long. So the key is that we needed to tie it into a specific process. Typically, the review time with CPZ is around the 30 business day area. For many permits, sanitary, zoning, those kind of things. So that's where we tied in the 30 business days for CPZ to make a determination to issue or deny a permit. The appeals process, any individual, group, or organization to whom the license has been issued may or denied may appeal. A township at which the event is taking place may be able to appeal the decision. That must be submitted within 5 business days of the permit being issued. And then at that point, Administrator Leonard or his designee would have 5 business days to render a decision on that appeal. A large portion is because of freedom of speech. The appeal cannot be based on content, message, or the viewpoint of the assembly. So they would have to, any appeal would have to address some other concern, a health or safety concern. So towns, in order to create transparency and make sure that towns would have enough notification and time, if they so choose to review and to appeal a permit being issued or denied, we would notify a town that the event is taking place in when we receive an application, and then also again when we issue or deny that application. Another large component to analyzing the large assemblies ordinance was recovery of fees. So it was determined by the work group that the applicant should and shall submit a fee for an assembly permit. The other part is to recover time and services that other departments have in this process. We call those extraordinary services. These are services and activities that take place above and beyond the normal scope of an event taking place on a property, such as highway department needing to use overtime to block out certain roads, or sheriff's department to regulate traffic, things like those. So the work group decided that they wanted to have an opportunity for those departments to have work out separate contracts with each of those departments on how they would like those fees recovered with the applicant. Currently, as far as a fee for the actual application, I believe it's listed in 12.01.
That's correct. Again, you have a current ordinance. I think that's really important. Garrett's done a nice job. But it's not being followed by applicants, and staff haven't really been involved in it. So yes, 12.01, and it lays out a tiered structure for an applicant based on size. So if you have an event and your threshold is somewhat similar to what is proposed, it's 3,000 people. If your event is 3,000 people, and I want to say it's 3,000 and 9,999, it's $500. The idea from the work group right now is to get rid of a tiered structure and just have a single permit fee, which makes sense. The logic of the work group with the members on it from this committee and others was our review process doesn't fundamentally change based on size. Certainly some things change, like if your event is 50,000 people versus 3,500, there are different questions and things we're going to put in place, but the review is largely similar. So flat $500 application fee. And then the second part that Garrett's referring to that is not within the ordinance is this recovery of extraordinary services. There is no requirement in this permit process that any event has to use county staff. I want to be very clear about that. Security was a great example Garrett gave. There's not a requirement that people have to use the sheriff's office or a local police department. But if they want to use the sheriff's office or Jim's staff to do some traffic control sort of activity, for example, that's a separate issue that they have to work out with us on through a different communication. We don't want to wrap it up in this process because it can, one, make it more cumbersome and delay. But two, also to really reinforce, you can go out and have your own people do it. You can have your own independent security. Trust me, the sheriff's office would prefer that because it is a challenge with staffing and overtime. So thanks, Garrett.
So at this point, the next steps would be, like I said, it's going back to the work group. The Environmental Resources Committee decided that they wanted some more, some clarity, a little bit more reach out to maybe the dairy breakfast, and then some more look at the fees and the fee structure. So it is going back to the work group. I'm not sure if we have an actual date yet on the work group.
Does anybody on the committee have any questions? Just go ahead, Supervisor Jensen.
Sure, so my question would be, how does this compare to like other counties in the state as far as just, policy, ordinance, what we're trying to do?
Yeah, so the question was, how does this compare to other, just for the benefit of the people online, how does this compare to other ordinances that exist in other counties? That was the first part. Our ordinance, as it currently exists, there are a number of other counties that have similar ordinances. Staff brought that information to the work group for consideration. There are areas, certainly some counties restrict smaller events. I think, my recollection, correct me if I'm wrong, but I know there were at least one county, perhaps more, started at 500. And then there are others that have a larger number. Some have different rules based on the hours of the event. We, the work group, largely stuck with the threshold we've had since the ordinance was put in place, with some further definition, as Garrett said, to the parameters of what does 3,000 actually mean? So 3,000 at any given time, or 3,000 people as measured over an 8-hour period, to give some clarity that, say you're going to have an event, but it's largely mobile, and different people are cycling through over the 8 hours, but it's 3,000 different people, that would trigger it. Or you have a 1-hour event and there's 3,500 people, that too would trigger it. So we did a lot of reach out. Garrett and Shad and the rest of the staff went out and looked at other ordinances, and that's actually one of the reasons that we're going back to the work group. The sheriff recently became aware of a nuance that we want to dive into a little bit with a county in the southern part of the state in terms of some funding. But short answer to your question, yes, we reached out a lot, and I think we're in the ballpark of what other counties do.
Any other questions? Just one question I had, given the current events in Marathon County, what events that are occurring at this point would fall under this ordinance?
So currently, the Steam show would have been one, but they received a conditional use permit from the county.
Okay.
So they would no longer apply under this ordinance. The Taste and Glow, they would be an event that would most likely be underneath this ordinance. And Farm Tech Days, that is coming out, they're coming in 2026, I believe. They would also be part of this. And we've already had preliminary conversations with the organizers of Farm Tech Days, so.
Yeah. I think it's just important if and when this gets updated that we be very clear and transparent with people and let them know when we know of something that's happening, so that we're not running up to a 40-day period, because that's awfully tight window for somebody to be working through. Hopefully people are
Right.
getting ahead of things. So, all right. Well, we thank you for your update. I'm sure we'll have more conversation at either this committee or a bigger level. Commissioner Griesbach, item 7E, can you give us a quick 2024 summer construction update?
Things are out, everything's going. The County Trunk Highway X paving is pretty much done. We did start on the In Quick Bridge yesterday out on County Trunk Highway. And the other big item you do have in your packet, but we are doing the bridge inspections on those structures from 6 to 20. So far, we found 2 structures that probably need immediate attention, so it's a good thing we're out there checking those out. Both of them are on Highway O. One is in about a 20-foot fill area, so that'll be fun.
Any questions? Thank you for the report. Takes us on to item 8, next meeting date, time, announcements of future agenda items. 8A, committee members are asked to bring ideas for future discussion. Anybody have anything in particular?
Mr. Chair, next month we were going to have them today, but due to the agenda length, I moved it to August. We are going to have Todd Horn from the Bureau of Transportation Safety from WISDOT to kind of give us an update of comparisons, how Marathon County compares to other counties in the state averages, and any hot spots we have here in Marathon County.
Thank you. We'll look forward to that next month. Seeing no other suggestions, we'll move on to item 8B. Next meeting date is Thursday, August 1st, 2024, 9 a.m., so a little quicker turnaround than we had for our last meeting. Item 9, adjournment. Motion by Soibert, second by Vol. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Kills me with these dinner days. The winter is a lot easier for me to get away and actually be here. In the summertime.
You gotta know what after this.
And I knew because we had I forgot we had a